Hello and welcome to today's Astranti bite-sized video. We've got a slightly longer video for you today than we normally do, and that's, I think, because of how important this model is going to prove to be for all of you CIMA students studying for your exams, pretty much at every level, including your case study exams. And this is Porter's 5 Forces. So Porter's 5 Forces is a tool that is used to look at the microenvironment as opposed to Pastel, which we use to look at the broad factors of the macro environment. Now, Porter's 5 Forces is one of the most important business strategy models ever developed, and we're going to learn all about it now, everything that you need to pass your E3 exams. And it's going to play a big role in your E3 exams. It comes up a lot in various different syllabuses of your exam. So what we want to do is make sure you really understand the theory in the Porter's 5 Forces, as well as kind of begin to understand how it could be applied in a scenario situation for your exam. But anyway, before we get to thinking about that, let's learn more about the model. So Porter's 5 Forces has two main uses. Firstly, to work out how profitable an industry is, and then of course an organization can use that information to decide whether they should enter that industry, because they might not have entered it and they might just be looking for opportunities, or they might decide to exit that industry because they've realized a lot of threats. They think, well, actually now it's time to cut our losses and get out. And the second way it's used is for organizations to understand the forces that are impacting upon the industry, and specifically are impacting the profitability of the industry. And then once that's understood, the organization will then be able to make changes to make themselves more profitable once again. So let's bring up the 5 forces. You can see them there: new entrants, buyer power, supplier power, substitutes, and competitive rivalry right in the center. So these 5 forces, we're going to look at all of them in this section. Indeed, part of the tool is looking at all of these forces individually, and then once that's been looked at, the balance is taken over. So if on balance the forces are high, then the industry profitability will be low. But if the forces are acting upon the industry are low, then it would be considered that profitability in the industry would likely be high. And of course, if you're using it to decide whether to enter a market, you would do so. Forces are low, it's a good industry to enter. Forces are high, it's not an industry you would enter. Okay, so let's take a look at these 5 forces in more detail, and we're going to start right in the center with competitive rivalry. So just thinking about competitive rivalry, the force is going to be high, and so industry profitability low when there are lots of competitors. And that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? If there are lots of competitors in an industry, it's likely to be harder for that industry to be profitable, because each competitor will be driving down the prices, try and undercut their rivals. They'll all be vying for the same custom. So if those forces are high, then it's likely the profitability will be low. We've got a calculator on screen. Now let's imagine, for example, we're just thinking about consumer electronics industry. And in that industry, there are literally hundreds of different companies who are all competing to make the same kind of product, like a calculator. Although you don't see calculators so often anymore. They're all trying to make the same product. And so, price is going to be low because, of course, they all want to win that custom. And so that industry will have low profitability. But that's not the only impact on competitive rivalry. Force will also be high if there's little difference between the products. For example, if you go down to your local market, your local fruit and veg market specifically, and you've got 5 stalls in a row all selling apples, well then it's very difficult for one of those market stalls to make a big profit on those apples, because of course it's easy for the customers to go to a different company to get those apples, to go to a different stall to get those apples. So again, it's going to reduce the likelihood that a company can make a profit if there's lots of companies with little difference between the products. The force will also be high if competitors are strong. So if competitors are strong, if they're big, for example, if they've got the support and if they're able to use economies of scale, then of course it's going to be easier for them to be able to dominate the market. And then if there's several competitors that size, then it's going to be really difficult for anybody to make any money in that market, pardon me. So again, we can see the reasons why the force would be strong, and again, the reasons why there wouldn't be much profitability in that market. And the final force, high force, I should say, in competitive rivalry, is if there are exit barriers to the market. Now, an exit barrier, our prompt says extra barriers to market, but I promise you and assure you that it is exit barriers. Now, an exit barrier is if there are high costs of leaving a market. Now, if there are high costs to leaving a market, it's likely that competitors that would otherwise leave are going to stay because it costs too much to leave. And that goes back into our first point, which means there'll be more competitors in the market because they can't leave. And again, that's going to increase the force but reduce the profitability of that industry. And remember, we're talking about industry here. We're talking about the micro environment. We're not talking about the macro environment anymore like we were with Pastel. Okay, so there's competitive rivalry. Let's zoom back out to the 5 forces now. So let's move on now to our next force, which is new entrants. Now, we've got 2 reasons why a force will be high here. Now, new entrants, as the name suggests, is about companies entering the market. So these are new companies that are not already there. So we're looking at a high force and, of course, low profitability if new companies can easily enter the market. So what we're talking about here is low barriers to entry. For example, if we're talking about deep sea oil drilling, when there's going to be huge costs in setting up a company just from the sheer amount of equipment, the expensive, complex equipment they need, that's going to be high barriers to entry. There'll be lots of costs involved with getting in it. However, if there's low barriers to entry, for example, our fruit and veg stall, when really anyone can go and buy some fruit and veg from a wholesaler and sell it on a market stall, then it's more likely that companies can easily enter the market. So, of course, if new companies can easily enter the market, it's less likely to be profitable because we're going to see more competition. Now, similarly, but not quite the same, another high force which would cause low industry profitability is if new companies are likely to or intend to enter the market. Now, for this, let's think about Uber. Now, Uber is, of course, the rideshare company that was founded in 2009. Now, in 2015, had an estimated value of $62.5 billion. By becoming a rideshare industry, it kind of transformed the market for taxi cabs, which drove down profits for traditional firms. Now, because of their success, lots of other rideshare companies have tried to enter that market. So by seeing how successful they are, it made it more likely that other companies intended to, or in fact it did in the case of Uber, enter the market. So we've looked at what would cause high forces, and I mentioned low barriers to entry. So the opposite, if an industry has high barriers to entry or significant barriers to entry, it's going to be far harder for new entrants. And if it's far harder for new entrants, the force is going to be low, and then the industry is going to be profitable. But what kind of things cause significant barriers to entry? Well, one of them is the cost advantages of existing competitors are significant. Now, that goes back again to our kind of economies of scale example. If you've got a company that's already in place and it's a big company and it's able to take advantage of its size, then it's more likely that that's causing barriers to entry for new competitors because there's not much scope for their profitability. Another point is strong brands amongst competitors. So if a company has a strong brand, it's going to be difficult to draw the customers away from that company because it's human nature to trust what you know. I mean, you trust your friends more than a stranger, don't you? So if that brand has a strong, healthy brand, it's going to be very difficult for new entrants to come in and steal those customers away if it's a good brand. Of course, if it's a bad brand, that's not a significant barrier to entry. Another barrier to entry is the high entry cost. So if it's not expensive to join, that's a low barrier to entry. If it's a high cost of entry, like a shipping company or an oil company, it's going to require billions in assets, then there is going to be significant barriers because not everyone can have billions to invest to set up a company. Another barrier to entry could be a patent. Now, obviously, a patent protects certain formulas or inventions or products. And of course, if you as a company have a patent, it means that other companies can't come and copy it. And again, that gives these barriers to entries because the new competition just can't compete. And the final barrier to entry that we're going to look at here, it's not the only barriers to entry you're ever going to find, but the only ones we're going to look at here are customer contracts in place. So this means if a company has a contract with its customers, it's going to be very difficult for a new company to come in and get those customers onto their own contracts. So if we think about Amazon Prime and Netflix, they're both video streamers. They are the market leaders in video streaming, and the majority of people have one or another. Because of this, because those customers are tied down to these contracts, it's going to be very difficult for new companies to enter the marketplace. And what we saw in early 2020 was when companies such as Apple TV entered the streaming service, they were giving their contracts away with other products. So you would get a year's free membership with Vodafone. So that would get the customers used to having that service, they're more likely to take on a contract in the future. So there we go. There's some barriers to entries. If there's significant barriers to entry, it makes the force lower, which brings the profits for the industry up. Okay, we're going to zoom back out and we're going to look at our next force now, which is buyer power. Now, buyer power, as the name suggests, is all about the customer's power that they have over the competitors in the industry. So we've got high forces and, of course, low profitabilities if the customers are large. Now, this makes sense, doesn't it? Let's imagine we've got an organization, they've got one big customer, and that customer makes up 70% of that organization's sales. Well, that organization is going to be totally dependent on them. If that buyer comes to that company and says, we want a hefty discount, we want a 20% discount, or we're going to go to one of your competitors, it would be something you would have to consider. So there we go. That's big buyer power. That would increase the force and reduce the profitability of the industry. And similarly, customers have power if they can switch between the competitors earlier on. Just like we talked about with our fruit and veg stall, if you've got a commodity like bread and there's very little difference between the brands, it's very easy for customers when they're shopping to put one company's loaves back on the shelf and pick up another if they think the other is too expensive. So there we go. That's buyer power. Force is high if buyers have power, and industry profitability low because they wouldn't have the power. Let's zoom back out to our 5 forces. Okay, let's have a look at supplier now, and I think you're going to guess at what supplier power is all about. It's the power of the suppliers to the industry. So the force is high and industry profitability low if there are few alternative suppliers. Let's imagine we've got an organization that makes chemical Y, and this chemical Y is a key additive to any soft drink that is in production. Now, if this organization is the only supplier of this chemical and all the beverage producers have to buy from the supplier, then the supplier is going to have a huge amount of power because all the producers have to buy from that supplier if they want to remain in business. And so, of course, the supplier could charge whatever they wanted because where are the producers going to go? So that would mean the force would be high because there's low profitability, because of course the supplies could very well be expensive. And another reason why there may be high supplier power is if the cost of changing suppliers is high. So if you think about when you purchase a mobile phone contract, often the tariffs or the contracts are 24 months, 48 months long now. And if you want to switch, it means that you as a customer would have to pay the supplier off, which makes switching expensive and difficult. Now this means the force would be high and the industry profitability low. So there we go, that's supplier power. We've got one left now, which is substitutes. And substitutes is all about the product that a customer could choose, or a service they could choose instead of yours. So which products, which services could a customer easily switch to and still have their needs fulfilled like they do with a product or the service the company originally provides? So let's think about a cinema. Is there a substitute for a cinema? And remember, we're talking about industry now. We're not just talking about one competitor, because obviously you can go to different cinema chains. But of course there are other substitutes. What kind of fulfillment does a cinema give? Well, it's a night of entertainment, isn't it? Somewhere you can watch a new film in comfort. But similarly, you can watch new films in comfort on Netflix or on DVDs. And if we think about cinema as just being a night of entertainment, then perhaps sport or the theatre or any other form of entertainment also fulfills those needs. So the force is high and the industry profitability low when a customer can easily switch to something else and still have those needs met. And by looking at the cinema, you can see there are lots of different substitutes that customers could go to. So the force would be high and the industry profitability low because of the amount of substitutes that fulfill those needs. Okay, so there we go. There's our video today on Porters 5.4. So I hope you find it really useful. If you have, please be sure to like the video or subscribe to our channel so you keep getting more of these bite-sized videos. And if you think you understand this topic now, why not have a look at one of our EPKs, our exam practice kits, or our mock practice kits, and test to see how well you can apply this Porter's 5 Forces theory in questions exactly like you will find in your exams. So, good luck with your revision, and see you for the next video.